All right, everybody, I'm going to get started. I'm sure people will continue trickling in, as 15 minutes is not a lot of time to go check your email and make those calls that you have to make for work. I'm going to introduce myself first. I'm Kirsten Hunter. I'm an API evangelist for Akamai, but I have the grand fortune of having started working with REST APIs about 10 years ago, before anyone was really trying to do anything with them. So we created REST APIs. I supported people using them. I've worked at Netflix. I've worked at LinkedIn. So I've worked at other companies where I was trying to support people using APIs. And I've come to be really passionate about the developer experience. Now, the reason that I wanted to do this talk today is because most of the code that I write in Python. And then I try to write it again in some other languages. But I have heard so many people say, well, I program in Java, I program in Ruby, I can't look at your Python examples, they're too hard. Okay, you guys are all really smart. It's not that hard. It's just a dialect. It's not a language. It's just syntax. If you look at the code, you can figure out what it's doing, and you can then either use that code or you can bring it over into your own programming language that you have the most comfort with. So what I want to do here today is I have created a system where there's a front page single page app, and on the back end there's a Mongo database. And in the middle, you can plug in any of the 6 examples that I wrote. So I wrote one in Ruby, Python, Perl, PHP, and there's 2 in Node because I like both Happy and Express. And I'm here to tell you that they are not yet perfect, but they work mostly. Patches are welcome, and I will finish fixing the things that I found just before the talk, like you do later today. But I wanted to come up with an example that was interesting and made sense to people. We want to have the CRUD, and we want to maybe get one other piece of information. So what I did was I'm creating a fortune cookie server to remind all of you who had Unix a long time ago or haven't played with Unix. There used to be this little utility on Unix where you just type fortune and it gave you some quote from somebody somewhere. And that actually is a great application because we can add new quotes, we can delete quotes, we can update quotes, we can create new quotes. And then I added another thing, which is random, so you can see the little random quote that shows up. I do have code for this. There is code on Synedra / Polyglot on GitHub. You are all welcome to take out your computers and try to play along. You are welcome to throw things at me or ask me questions if it's not working the way you want to. It's sleepy time, like it's 2 hours after lunch, and I want you guys to get to play. There is a Docker container. It's mentioned on that page. It is currently building. So I'm going to try to sort of waste time for a few minutes while it finishes building so that you can get the most recent version. If you have a Mac, use the GitHub repository. If you have a PC, I'm sorry, the Docker installation is going to work best for you. Because usually PCs don't have a good Ruby environment or a good Python environment, PHP or Perl, and Node also is something that's usually lacking. But if you are a Node developer on your Windows box and you have your environment working, feel free to grab the Git repository and see how it works. Let me show you the repository page because it has useful information. Okay, so this is an overview of what's going to happen. We're going to have the API quotes, which is a quote list. API quotes random is a random quote. Slash is just a hello world from the framework. You have no idea how hard it is, and it shouldn't be hard, to, once you're using an API framework, host a single static page. So I actually I'm trying to get slash to be just a hello world thing, and then the demo has a single page app. Weirdly, I'm making these, all these functions, and I've got these great CRUD, libraries, and they work fantastically. But just serving a single HTML page actually took longer in most of the languages than it did to write the API itself. So setup, you're going to need to have MongoDB. The Docker container has it already. Then you're going to run a Mongo import to pull in the quotes that I have. And then there's examples for each of the languages. PHP is the hardest. Don't ask me why. You have to use Composer. My friend wrote this part for me. I said, did you see the other ones? Because they're really short, and yours is really long. And he's like, no, this is as simple as it gets. I was like, okay. Thought PHP was supposed to be simple. Okay, so Python, you're just going to go into the directory, do a setup.py install, and I'm using Flask. So in each of these languages, I'm trying to use the most, the closest to an idiomatic sort of a library for that language so that you can see what it looks like when people are using those languages, so that when you're trying to figure out what someone else is doing with code, you have something to compare to. Now remember, what's exciting about this thing that I've built here is that I'm giving you an apples-to-apples comparison. Almost all the time, you're going to look and you'll see a tutorial on Ruby, and then you'll see a tutorial on Perl, and they're totally different. They're doing different things, they're doing it differently. I've found situations where Python tutorials decide that everything should be an assert, which makes everything muddy and difficult to find. So this is a very simple implementation of these things. So Node, I actually have both Happy and Express, because Node is, well, it's pretty sexy when you're making APIs. Ruby is the cutest. You know, it's just adorable, like it is. But Perl does not look horrible. However, I am here to tell you that if you do that cpan command, probably by the time you're done, the Docker container will have built also. But there's information down here on the Docker setup to show you how to do it. So now I'm going to talk through each of the different pieces of the setup so that you know how challenging it was to do this. Now, it wasn't challenging because I'm not good at writing code. The writing code was actually pretty easy once I found the right library and I found some tutorial that was actually, you know, showing me how that particular language's module worked. This is Prezi, by the way. I normally use Haiku Deck, but Prezi seemed like a good choice for this. So, all right. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, which is not exactly related to the code, but it is important for me to share with you as people who might make APIs, is schema models. So I have modeled the schema in RAML, and also that Swagger, which is now called OpenAPI. They changed their name. If you look at it, you can see that there's endpoints. Let's see if we can get... Yeah, so you can see that there's endpoints. It shows the parameters. So what this is, if you're not familiar with schema modeling languages, if you ever used a SOAP API in the past, the SOAP API, the first thing you say is, give me your contract. And the SOAP said, you know, here's your WSDL file. It tells you exactly what it is that you can do and what you're going to get back for each of those calls. So REST doesn't have that. I refer to it frequently as the wild, wild west. Just like Perl makes it really easy to write bad code, not having a contract makes it super easy to write bad APIs. And you don't notice that they're bad until you're done creating them and your users say, I have no idea what to do with this thing. It's totally unusable. So taking the time to do a schema model gives you the ability to make sure that the code you write the first time does exactly what it's supposed to do. So here's my single-page application. It's not very exciting. You can't see it too well. We'll see it while we're playing with the code. But it's got quotes, and then over here, it's very fuzzy up there. The VGA is not the best. Can you guys read that? I can't make it any bigger. Anyways, it's just HTML with JavaScript. It's just a standard single-page app. It doesn't do anything particularly fancy. It doesn't know that it's MongoDB in the back end. It's just expecting information in a nicely formatted JSON format. Okay. So Node.js has two. Sorry. To learn my Prezi. Node.js has two languages. So there's Express, which is the server that people have used a lot, and then Happy is a newer server, and it's a little bit tidier. It's not quite as performant as Express in my experience. It's not that, but they're both different ways of expressing the same thing. So one of the cool things is to take the code from Express and look at the code from Happy. I'm using the same backend Mongo library, which is MongoID. Oh, actually, I'm using Mongoose here. And I set up the schema. The schema in the MongoDB is very, very simple. So it's going to have an ID. I have an index number. In MongoDB, that it always has an ID, but that ID is ugly as sin. It's this OID thing, and if you're trying to make a really cool little API where people can look at stuff and they can be like, oh, this is the 2000th quote. You don't want to use those OIDs. So I created another entry, which was index, and then I have author and content. So it's a very simple setup, and it always comes back in JSON. So here's Happy. You can see over here we have router route, and it knows that API is at the top. Over here you can see we have API quotes random. It looks very similar. We're still using the same Mongo interface. So we're going to go quote find one. This is the random route. And basically all it is get me something random from the server. Perl. You know, I was really surprised when I did this. Now, I actually wrote code in Perl for 15 years. And I've never encountered any kind of Perl that I would consider attractive. But this actually turned out to be pretty attractive. Like it looks readable. It actually makes sense. So this is to tell you that not all Perl is ugly. You know, it's not like the wordy troll every time. It can be. It's super easy to make it that way. But in the process of making this, I ended up making something that looked pretty good. So here's PHP. We'll just look at the live code on that one, because you guys can do that on your servers too. It's more complicated than the other ones, but it does exactly the same thing. And then Python. I love Python. It's my favorite. I used Flask. There's lots of choices with, I mean, I could have gone Django and had this bloated thing, but I didn't. This is actually, so Python and Perl. Perl actually has Catalyst, is one of the web frameworks that you can use in Perl, and it is this bloated monster of a thing that it's like Django. It's designed for really powerful things. It's not designed for, I have one endpoint and I need to do 4 things on it. So I'm trying really hard to use exactly the correct library in each of the languages. And then there's Ruby, which is cute. So, you know, but they're all very similar. They're all saying, they all have this API notion where there's endpoints and actions. So looking through these, it should make it easy for you to see where the differences are between the various languages in terms of how they interact. So let me take a quick poll. I know you're all Java people, right? No? Because this is the Java Users Group Conference. So how many of you like Ruby? Okay, Perl? Rock on. Represent. Python? Okay, and PHP? There you are. Yeah, you can help me make it better. So, more importantly, how many of you are comfortable looking at code in other languages? That's good. But you came here anyway. It's awesome. So, so really what I'm trying to do, as an API evangelist, my goal is to make sure that people can get what they need from the code that's out there. So let me go back to the code, and we'll take a look at it after I get some more. Does anybody have any questions so far? Yes? What's the issue? Oh, right. So in Python, you would pip install -r requirements.txt. Sorry, that was a typo. That's what happens when you work on your talks late at night. So yeah, you can use pip to install the libraries that you need. Anybody else find any issues? They're just there for exercises for everybody. I put them there on purpose. Huh? Not bugs, they're exercises. Okay, so one of the other things that I want to talk about is the process of setting things up. Now, if you use the Docker container, I have already gone through the process of setting things up. Yay me. If you are setting things up yourself, for PHP, you have to install Mongo, you have to PECL install Mongo, which means you need pair, so there is a variety of things you have to set up. Python is not that complicated. You've got the requirements.txt, it pulls it in. It doesn't tend to bring in a lot of other bloat into your system. Node's pretty good. npm install, once again, I find that these systems are pretty fast in giving you the libraries that you need in order to accomplish the goal. Ruby, the bundler is pretty quick, again. And you know, I keep saying things are quick, and that's because I was just running through the process of setting up the Perl thing, and I'm going to say does not quick. So one of the things about Perl that you will probably find that is a little bit frustrating is that you want to use something like file find, which is a really, really simple library. And it pulls in 143 other modules, just because that's how CPAN works. People are like, well, I can do this myself, or I can use this other module. So this is all to say, if you end up doing a Perl install, it's going to feel really gross, but really what you should do is just do the CPAN command, go get some coffee, come back, type clear, and just see how it works. So just don't look at it. It's really, because it always has to go through all the tests for all the modules, and there's tons of tests, and there's like 300 modules that you're getting. So it's not a scary thing. You're not going to be forced to do anything bizarre. It just does take a lot of time, and it seems like it's an eternity if you're watching it. Would you agree? Yes, although in this particular case, you'll notice that I have a dash. You'll notice that I have a -f because so that means force, because the Dancer plugin CRUD doesn't pass its own tests, but it works. All right, so let's take a look. First, let's take a look at the Dockerfile, because this is going to give you an idea of what it is that you're going to need to do. Let's see. So I'm using the Python 2.7.10 Ubuntu install because most of the Ubuntu installs have an earlier Python, and I like this one because it works really well with OpenSSL. I am installing all of the things that I need to have. This Docker container does take a while to build, which is why it wasn't done when I got started today. So then I'm pulling in the right node, and then I'm going into each directory and I'm doing the things that I need to do. Notice that I'm doing etc init.d mongodb start. It doesn't actually work because I'm not in a shell. I have to take that out of there. But gem install bundler, bundle install, pip install -r requirements.txt. I have it right there because Docker won't do it wrong for me. So CPAN. So basically, when you use the Docker container, it will just work. That's the theory. I've spent a lot of time on it today, making it just work better. And then you're going to be able to take a look at the application at 3000, because I have exposed 3000 down here. So let's take a look at the code. Well, let's take a look at the quote stuff that I'm telling you to include. So basically, this is, can I view it? It is a JSON file with all my quotes. I pulled it from a quote server. I'm sure they won't mind. So let's take a look at, we'll start at the top. Node. Oh, right. try over here. So package.json is what you install. This is how the installation manager works on Node. For those of you who are familiar with it, you know the dependencies are down here. It's actually pretty quick. It takes maybe 30 seconds to do all the setup of everything that you need. So again, we have, let me make it bigger. We're using Mongoose. I have the quote schema. I'm keeping track of the count. This is cruddy demo logic. I always just add the quotes to the end, and if I delete one, then it can be found randomly. And this is just to make simplicity in code that you're looking at on the screen. I don't expect you to copy that particular piece of my logic. What this is more about is, man, I got to make a quick API. And I just wanted to do the things. So grab this. This is actually one of the things most of the web evangelists that I know are like, oh, this is awesome. Because a lot of times I have to create these sample APIs, and I don't want to start from scratch. And somebody wants to do it in a different language. But I know it can't be that hard. So we have this is how I'm doing the static servering. I'm going to tell you in each of these languages about the static server because it's kind of a pain. So I'm doing a server route before I actually get into the API part. And we're always going to see some random where it's like we have 2005 quotes, and I just give me a random one. So how many of you are Node people? Yeah, so this should look pretty familiar to you. Happy is nice. It keeps the method and the path close together, so you can tell exactly what's going on. It's at when we get to express, you'll see that it actually teases them apart. So it says this route, and then the get, the post, and the put are separated. So in this case, I think this makes it a little bit more easy to read and find out what's going on. And then we got put, delete. So the Express server, let's see if we can, there we go. So this is the quotes list. It is under API. It knows that it's under API. API quotes is where everything happens. But you can see you've got the route, and then we have the get. Down here we have the post, and then we have delete. Yes, no, we delete an item, not a list. So the route looks at the quotes, index. All of the libraries that I used in order to create this, each of them has a way to represent that there is an index ID on the command line, on the URL. Is this helpful? Are you guys, is this good? Okay. And again, please steal my stuff. Tell me when things are broken. I will fix them. Patches are always welcome. And Go is the next language I'm going to use, although I worked really hard to make these all really pretty and non-intimidating. And then I looked at the Go one, and I was like, that's totally going to mess up my story. So, but I'll do it anyways, because Go is cool. So Perl has a lot of $signs, but it is not necessary to use all the $signs possible. You can use it in an object-oriented way. It ends up looking more like this. For those of you who aren't super familiar with Perl, my just means this is the context, the scope for this particular variable. Perl does not like global variables, as most languages that are reasonable do not. You don't want to have a global variable. You want to figure out how to pass it from around in the various things. So this is not as tidy quite as the Node example, but you can see it's quite readable. I mean, you know, people think Perl is always hard to read. It's quite readable. And one of the things that is really important to realize is that if you are ever doing anything that's like a DevOps sort of a task, you may find some Perl code that you need to interact with. It might just be there. And there's a lot of people who are quite intimidated by Perl because it's got all these weird things. But if you can find Perl code that does approximately what you want, you can still figure out what the logic is behind that code and either use the Perl code or write it again in the language that you like. So I actually had someone who was a Perl person say, wow, that looks a lot less bad than I expected it to. So that's Perl. Perl, I'm using Dancer. Once again, Catalyst is the web framework that most people are aware of, and it is a behemoth of I mean, it's quite a good web server system. It can do many, many things, but it doesn't do little things very easily. Okay, PHP, just fix post. I don't know what it is with the PHP and the composer. I mean, it's odd to me. Okay, so Davey, who wrote this, Davey Shafiq, is Mr. PHP, PHP 7, he's working on HTTP 2. He shoved everything sort of inside. You know, I did all the Mongo connections outside and then sort of called them. He's doing it inside. But still, you can see it's an API quotes, it's a group. He's doing the same thing. He's finding the things. And while this is more complicated than most of the other examples, I feel that it is perfectly reasonable to figure out what it's doing. One of the things that I need to do in my Polyglot repository, and I promise to do in the next couple days, is write comments. So you can tell what it is that's happening in the various pieces, and you can associate them with the pieces in the other languages. Python. So Python has Django. Everybody knows Python has Django, and people use Django or pylons. Flask is this tiny little thing that I really like. I started using it when I was actually doing an API 101 where I taught people how to make a little Flask server and push it to the cloud at Google, which was really cool, except I was doing it in England, and I learned the hard way that the people in London don't have expressions on their faces like Americans do. And so I got to the end, and they've all pushed it to the cloud, and they're just sitting there, stone-faced. And I was like, did you need some help? No. Is it working okay? Yeah. Pause. I'm just resting on my laurels because I deployed something to the cloud. I was like, oh, that's your ecstatic face. I just had no idea. But so Flask, it's a cute little thing. It's not designed for big applications like Django is. But once again, if you're making a very quick little API, it's nice to just have a slight shim layer rather than installing a really massive set. So I made a class of the quote because Python really likes that whole object-oriented thing. So the quote, you can delete it, you can put it, and then there's the quote list, which is a different resource. I have them down here. I'm using API add resource. The quote list is API quotes, and the quote itself is API quotes quote ID. So once again, it's just the same. Here we have the app route demo, which took me 35 minutes to find the correct way to send my single page app to the front page. And I don't feel like I'm bad at Googling. There's so many answers, especially on Stack Overflow. And Stack Overflow likes to answer questions a little bit more complicated than the question that was asked. They're like, well, if you dig down deep into the object and then pop it up 3 levels and then you do this, then it works great. And you're like, yeah, but just what is the piece that I'm missing? I always say Stack Overflow has 2 different types of answers. There's RTFM. That's, everybody loves the RTFM. And then There's the full answer, the complete answer, more than you wanted answer that has the code, and you can probably figure out which piece of that code is what you actually needed. Okay, now are there any questions? Yes? Yeah. I do like Stack Overflow. I just Google, and I usually use no fewer than 5 terms when I Google. And so I end up with usually, a lot of times the answer is in a Git repository where the issues are, right? And that's the best, right? If it's actually about that particular library, right on. I do use the Python docs. I don't like them. They're very abstract, and I like examples. So when I write documentation for my job, I write tutorials, I write examples, I write use cases, I write data structures, I give sample code that can be played with. So that's what I like for other people to do for me, but they don't usually. So then I make more examples of things like this. Okay, so that leaves Ruby. I'm using Sinatra and not Rails. Once again, Rails, very big. Sinatra, cute and small. Plus, he starts dancing, or he starts singing. He doesn't start dancing. The dancer starts dancing when it starts listening on the port. So once again, we have namespaces API. So now we're building the namespace at this level. And then the action goes with the endpoint. So this is like happy, and then we have them tied together, very close, easy to tell what it is that you're looking at. It's pretty neat and tidy. This is one of the things that Ruby was actually designed for. Ruby's great. Ruby has the routes. So even if you're not using Ruby on Rails, Ruby itself is designed to think of things in terms of routes, endpoints, and what you want to do with them. Plus, there's a lot of people who really love Ruby. So once I'm done building up my Python stuff, I'm going to start putting more stuff out in Ruby and Perl, because Apple likes Perl. So we ought to have some examples for them. Oh yeah, so I work at Akamai, just so you know. I have to say that, and then they'll pay me for being here. Works out quite well. Okay. Real quick, now that we can kind of see them. And if they're not complete, I'm going to make them complete. But for now, you can see that this is the RAML one. So you can actually see that I'm returning an example of what it is that you would get. One of the things that's cool about schema markup languages is that all of them have an open source way to represent, to sort of mock up a server based on the information in your schema model. That means you can mock up a client and make sure that it's going to be able to do what it needs to do before you start writing the code. It's also the case that because this is very readable for a human, you can use this and give it to your product manager. And your product manager can say, no, we need these other 2 endpoints. Or why is it that you're returning this one way and a different way over here? It makes it possible to see what those APIs are going to look like in context with each other. So you can be more consistent and avoid duplicate code that is broken. So just when you get into the repository, which I hope you all do, take a look at the schema models and kind of think about what you could do with those. You can drive your testing, you can drive documentation, you can make sure that there's documentation for each of those endpoints. You actually get free documentation, sort of. Would look so much better if it were easier to see. But so this is the Swagger functionality over here. Over here, you can see what the get quotes. All of this stuff is dynamically created for you and your customers by the schema model. So you don't have to do reference documentation. So schema models are quite cool. So I'll get back to what I was talking about before. Does anybody have any questions about schema modeling? Schema models in general? RAML, API, Blueprint? Yeah, so you can go to raml.org. Or you can step outside and talk to the MuleSoft people. Not now, later. After I'm done, you can go talk to the MuleSoft people, and they will give you a cute little mule, and they will tell you about RAML. Swagger is currently coordinated by SmartBear, but it's trying to be the open API standard, the new API standard. So it's great, but it is the leading edge, and they add things to it all the time. RAML is a little bit more stable, so it's more enterprise friendly. Okay. Now, let's look at the HTML file. It's not that exciting, right? It's just, we have HTML, a little bit of CSS, some quick AJAX queries. There's nothing really magical about this, except that it's just expecting something that looks like what that schema model looked like to come back, so it can give you the information. So now that I've wasted time for a while, that's one of my Docker containers. It's probably not going to work. No. Okay. I put all my open source stuff in Dropbox because then I can work on it on all my computers. Okay. So the first thing I need to do is run MongoDB. Oh, it's already running. How handy is that? So I'm going to go into Node, and I'm going to say node express server.js. And it runs, which is great. I'm going to localhost 3000. So at the base, basically all it's going to do is say hello world, just so that you can see I'm running it from Express, just in case you didn't believe me. So then we have demo. And so demo is this little page that we have. And you can add a new quote. You get the message of the day. This is a random quote. And then you get all of the quotes. You can see I was adding some test quotes. I can delete them. I can view them. I can edit them. You can see how that works. That's one of the things I was noticing wasn't exactly. So you can see it made the change, but it didn't. I didn't send back the appropriate thing, and so it's not going to the right place. But it did make the change. So that's basically what all of them do. I will go through them one at a time, but you can see what the interaction is. It's actually a little better on Chrome, but you can see the resources. And if I add a new quote, actually, let's just view a quote. Okay, we'll add a new quote. This is a new quote. Me. Okay, so we have a new quote by me. And you can see we did a call to quotes. That was the post, so it returns the new number of the new quote. I asked for random. I got my random, scarcely one person in 1,000. And then get quotes, and I tell the quotes that I only want 10. I used to get all 2,000, and then it would time out. It was really very sad. So does this all make sense in terms of how APIs work? Does anybody have any questions about the basic functionality of walking through a CRUD situation? The awesomeness of it. Okay, so how many of you have tried to get the GitHub repository working? Some of you. How's it working? Sweet. That's awesome. I mean, I'm not surprised at all, of course. It's completely perfect in all ways. So this is one of the things that I think is really important that we do as a community, as a development community, is create these places where we have the same code in different languages. If you find something that has code in a language that is not your favorite, and you change it over to another language that is your favorite, it would be great if you were to put a pull request into that original people, to those original people, and say, hey, I've also got an example in this other language. We tend to live in our little ivory towers, where we believe that what we do is our thing and not the community thing. But to me, the open source community is about a lot of things, and this is one of the things that's really important. We've just started having conversations on Twitter once again about people who diss people who use PHP, because, like we do. Josh Simmons, who's one of the OSCON community people, was shocked, but found out that that was still happening. It was still people dissing on Perl people, dissing on anyone who is different. And when you do that, when you take another language and belittle it, especially when you're not using it and not belittling yourself at the same time, you stifle creativity in the community. So if you're telling somebody that PHP is the stupidest language ever and no one would ever use it for anything, and that person has just done this magical thing in PHP, they're not going to tell you about it. It's not going to, there's not going to be brainstorming. There's not going to be synergy. It's not going to work out in a way that's better for the community. So this is one of the things that I think we can do. We can create situations where people can explore the different languages, how they're similar and how they're different. And so that's why I did this. Are there any questions? No? No questions? I'm going to go short, I know. That's okay. So I will show you some of the other ones. I mean, we've seen the code. Now, the Docker one, let me check and see if the Docker one is actually running. And let me show you the Docker. I showed you the Docker file, but let's see if we can. Is it still building? It was building. Yeah. It'll be here in a second. I actually really love Node, because Node, I think, was one of the first times when people started learning a second language that wasn't too weird, because we all kind of knew JavaScript, the front end, and then whatever our backend language was. And then all of a sudden, Node came along and made JavaScript backend. Okay. Let's check. Building. Right on. So I can't blame it for building for a long time, because it's doing that CPAN request that takes about 10 minutes to do. It's also doing the thing with PHP. It's also doing all of the other startup things. So the one that's actually out there, I'm going to copy this. So when you start Docker, when you're not on a Linux box, you are not using the same IP as your current box. So it gives you this IP address at the end, and this is where you're going to access the web server that you're using for the quote server. So I'm going to, let's see, init.d. This is all on the GitHub repository. And then we're going to run this thing. Node. And then we'll go node express server.js. Oh, right, node.js. So I'm going to be going to this IP address, which I copied and then didn't keep. Oh, there's my whale. It's always good to find a whale. I think it's funny, though, that they chose a whale, even after the fail whale of Twitter. I feel like Docker could have used something a little bit different. Okay, so let's look at demo. Oh. How about if we check the actual port? All right. Shoot. Oh. I think this one doesn't have the right. So this is one of the places where I've discovered using Docker, you can't assume that you're coming from localhost because you're not. So I set it to respond to anyone, and now we should get something, but we're not. Okay. It's just trying to make me look bad. Let's see. That's a good question. Let me see if I can just get that. Nope. Okay, so check and see if anything's listening there. On the, see it's B? A-N-T. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, apt-get. All right, so let me think about this for a minute while I'm terrified because I'm standing here in front of people and it's not working. Yeah, oh, I know what the problem is. Let me find the Docker quick start. So in the current version of the Docker, it says to expose 3000, but I'm not exposing 3000 right now. So right, let's try, oh, because it's already running. Nice. I should stop the other one from running. Okay, so I'm going to go Perl. Oh, we got to do the Mongodb thing. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to stick with not Docker for now because it's not behaving for me. Unless you guys want me to go through this because this is what it looks like to try to make Docker work. Yeah, I should map 3000, but it's something else is running at 3000. Oh yeah, I could do that. I think it's that way. Are you sure? No, because I do 83,000 all the time. Well, we'll see. Well, we should actually be able to tell if it's running before we do the. Yes. That should be done already. Okay. No. Start. And no. Okay. So let's see whether that works. I mean, it should also expose 3000, but let's try localhost 3001. I was having trouble with that mapping earlier today, so. All right. I promise I will give you guys good examples in the GitHub repository. This is the magic that it's very difficult to do live. So I'm only about 50 minutes out of my 75. So I'm going to ask you guys, we will open the floor to questions about APIs. We don't have a lot of API stuff at this conference. Somehow I got in the Agile world, which was interesting, but odd. Yes, Greg? Yes, I do. I have a book called Irresistible APIs that is being published by Manning. It's currently available in the Manning Early Access Program. And it is not super technical. The goal of it is to teach you how to use a process to create irresistible APIs, APIs that people really want to use. So it goes through the process of business value, and then metrics, and then use cases, because your API needs to be a first-class product, and so many times we end up with this ugly side thing. If you don't go API first, you create these APIs that are totally unrelated to each other, and nobody wants to use them, and then they die a sad death. So yes, irresistibleapis.com. You can actually go there and get the first chapter free. The first one's always free, right? But I do talk a lot about schema modeling. I walk through the process of modeling schemas in both RAML and in Swagger. It is interactive. You actually get to create your own API and run it. At some point, I may move this code over there because this is more fun than that is. So does anybody have any questions about APIs in general? Or interaction? Yeah. Yeah. So the thing about Swagger / OpenAPI, what I find very complicated and difficult is that they tend to abstract things. So it is not that easy to look at a Swagger specification if you're not a programmer and say, well, a quote looks like this, and I'm putting it over here in the definitions. And then when I tell you what you're going to get back, it's a quote, so you have to look over there at the definitions. I prefer RAML because the example is right there. You actually can abstract in RAML as well if you want. But to me, the RAML example that I have is much more accessible to someone who is not a programmer. As soon as you start abstracting things out, you're asking for trouble with regular people who don't program. So, I mean, lots of cool stuff in Swagger, but that always frustrates me because I'm trying to explain it to people and they get confused. All right, well, I'm going to let you all go. I did bring cookies. So if you guys want fortune cookies, because it's a fortune cookie server. So if you guys want fortune cookies, I did not get special messages. There's just, you know, the same cruddy little message you'd get at the Chinese food place. On the other hand, it's crunchy and sweet, and you get a little piece of paper that you can jot things down on really, really small. So thanks, everybody, for coming. I'll be here for a little while. Come up and ask if you have any questions. Thank you.